Hello everybody, welcome back to the Cranberry Cornstalk YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made these little Uncle Sam sugar sack babies. I made 8 baby bodies and 2 of them got turned into Uncle Sam, and I'll continue with videos to show you what I did with each of the sugar sack babies. Today we're going to work on, like I said, the Uncle Sam, and I started out by just using black floss thread, and I was going to make just string eyes. I wasn't quite sure yet, but that's where I was going to start. It seems like when you place the eyes on the doll, it starts to build a personality, so I always like to start with the eyes. I pushed a knotted piece of the black floss through the head to the back, and when I enter and exit the head with any type of string or floss, I always try to keep the place that I exit out the back in the same place, so you just have that one spot with all the thread that come through. And that also gives away the fact that it is a handmade doll, and I just think it's something that I look for when I'm buying one, to know that someone put a little extra time into it to make it handmade. So this is where you can see where you want your eyes to stay there. Sometimes you can put them further apart, closer together. You just kind of look at the doll and get the feel for the personality that you're going for. Moving the eyes around can make a major difference in the face of the doll. So that's where I started, and of course I like the long noses that are really popular right now, and all you do is stitch back and forth on the doll face, and you gather the stuffing up behind the front face of the doll to make the little puff of the nose to sculpt it. It's called doll sculpting. So you're just sculpting a nose onto the doll. As you can see here, you just go back and forth gathering some of the stuffing with your needle until you get the nose that you want. And of course the folk art dolls are exaggerated noses. They go up between the eyes and clear down to almost to the neck, so that's what makes them so cute. The next thing I did was I painted some black acrylic paint. I watered it down, and I like to put it in the thread areas because it just exaggerates the features that you're trying to give the doll, and it makes the doll look like it's been around for a long time. Black seems extreme, but it really isn't. It looks much better on the doll. I put it in any of the places where I want the doll to rescind to the background, like the center of the eyes or the edges of the nose, things like that you want to, be a deeper place on the face. So I put on there nice and wet, and then I went ahead and stained while it was wet with my favorite stain, coffee stain, tea stain, whatever you want to use. I have a recipe in one of my videos that I use, and you just kind of spread it around. You put your wet stain on the cloth, and that helps keep your edges of the paint that you're using from getting too strong and too crisp. You don't want those lines to be real obvious. You kind of want the colors to blend together, and whenever I mix water with my paints, it's always the stain water instead of just plain water, because it just makes the doll go better together, and it makes the colors more muted and more primitive and more old. So that's just a little tip I'll give you. I use stain water instead of plain water to water down my paints when I'm making a doll. I decided I wanted these eyes just a little bit bigger, and you'll see I work with them throughout. You sort of get the personality for your doll. I just keep working with this little Uncle Sam and making him more primitive and more primitive as I go. He kind of looks scary sometimes at first, but he turns out really cute. And remember, I made 2 dolls, so there they are. Aren't they adorable? I love the way they turned out with the stains and how they laid. Now the next thing I did was I decided he needed some little pants, so some little blue trousers. Now my paint kind of looked a little purpley. It was called Midnight Blue from Folk Art, but I went ahead and added some black paint to it to make it more prim. I don't know why. I love folk art colors, but for some reason, I don't know if my paint's old. It's very possible. I used to teach tool painting classes and I have a lot of paint bottles, but folk art is truly the only paint that held the test of time. I can still use it. But so I decided he needed some little breeches, so I painted him some blue, some dark blue, just the bottom part. I love these little sugar sack dolls. They're just something a little bit different than the average doll with the arms and the legs, and the history shows that they made these little sugar sack dolls for the children. Whenever they would get sugar, and it would come in these little cloth sacks, and that was probably one of the few fabrics they would have. So they would make a doll at Christmas time, maybe for a little girl, and they were pretty basic. They would have stick arms, stick legs, things like that, if they had them at all, but they didn't have a lot of extra things on the dolls for them to play with, or to, I suppose, to break, or just resources. So I gave him some little blue breeches, and there it is, all dried. He's turning out really cute, but I wanted to give him, he needed to be holding something, and of course Uncle Sam, the first thing I thought of was a flag, and I favor the homemade flags versus the purchased ones. I just think they look more original and authentic from days past. So I'd had a piece of muslin here that I stained, and when it was dry I cut it in half to make 2 flags. They were about the size that I wanted, and here I'm just pulling off a lot of the extra strings because I can't stand all those strings. It seems like they're never ending when you deal with unfinished edges, but they are cuter. So I just divided it in half to make the right size of a flag for the dolls that I was making. And you can see I'm just trimming up a little bit of the scraps there. And the next thing I decided is I needed some stars for my flag. So I took my star fabric, which I found was really cute. And it's a little brighter, and you'll see later in the video I do tone it down just a little. I don't know what it is, you guys, about my primitive stuff. I don't like white. I feel like white is more farmhouse, and I've seen other people do it and it looks fine, but I just like to do away with the white and make it more stained and old. So the stars in this fabric were a little bit brighter than what I like to see, so I did end up staining them down a little bit more. I always seem to mess with my fabric. Once I get it established on something, it never stays the color I purchase it. I have a hard time finding really primitive fabric. Do you guys know of any place that you can order from online? I found most of the places I find fabric I like, it's super expensive, or it's in fat quarters. And as you can see, I usually don't use just fat quarters. I usually make a lot of dolls fast. So anyway, if you know of any, let me know down in the comment section. I'm always looking for a really primitive fabric, which I feel like it's really hard to find. So what I did was I snipped the edge of the fabric, and then of course I tore it to make, instead of just cutting, because it makes the nice little frayed edges, and it fit my flags very well. And you guys, if you ever have to decide, do I glue it, do I sew it, I just think sewing is a nicer finish. It seems like you put more thought into it. Of course there's times when we glue things on, and it's okay for a hold or a basic hold down, but for me, I travel and take my stuff to the craft shows, so I like to at least get a few stitches on everything, even if it's 1 or 2, just to hold it in place, and know that if my hot glue gives out on a hot day in the tent, then my stitches will hold. I've had it happen to me way too many times. I even switched my glue to the Gorilla Glue hot glue, and we'll find out this summer is the first summer I had with all those. Because of COVID, we didn't have any last year, but it's my first summer that I'll see how the Gorilla Glue hot glue works out. But I did stitch them on. Just stay as close as you can to the edge of the fabric, and I never have a problem. Of course, it's already frayed, so you can see how far in you want it frayed, and it'll just continue to fray back to the stitches that you give it. Just a real basic straight stitch around the edges of your flagged fabric will hold it together. Okay, so the next thing I decided was my little flags needed some red stripes. I took them over to the painting table, and it's the glass surface there. It's easy to wipe off, but you saw in the last part of my video where I was trying to paint my doll and it slid all around the surface. It's great to have the glass because it wipes off so easy, but when you're painting things it's so frustrating because it just slides everywhere when you're trying to paint. But anyway, it's a nice surface. I got my glass mat there at Joann Fabrics. So what I did was I took some more red folk art paint and I just mixed it with some, again I used my stain for my water, so just plain basic water. It just makes your paint look more prim. I let the brush, I used a flat brush, and I let the brush make the lines for me. Keep the pressure across the fabric at the same pressure the whole way across, and then you won't get your wider and skinnier parts of your line. You know, just hold the same pressure across the fabric, and you see here it's really watered down, which helps to penetrate the fabric. You aren't constantly going back over and dealing with it. Again, just I would use the stained water instead of plain water, unless you like the brighter colors. If you're going more for brighter colors, then you would just, you know, water down your paint with regular water then. But just like I said, just make sure you get the same pressure clear across the fabric, so the paint, the shape of the brush, the flat brush, keeps the lines for you even the whole way across. And of course, like I said, the stars are just a little bit lighter than I wanted. I wanted them to be more prim. So I went ahead back over, cleaned my brush out, went ahead back over with some more stain water and re-stained the stars so that they would show up watermarked and, you know, a little bit more grungy. I wanted to hit the thread because the thread was just a cream thread and it was kind of bright. So I went back over and got where the thread was, where I stitched, and also some of the places where the stars looked a little bit brighter. Now, because you're using such a wet paint, a watered down paint, it does go through your cloth, so make sure you have something that, you know, is not a surface that is not your dining room table or something. You can see here when I pick it up, yeah, the paint went right through the cloth. That's just something to keep in mind. So I decided that my little Uncle Sam needed a beard. Every little Uncle Sam needs a beard. I took a piece of sisal and I just pulled it apart, and I wanted to tangle it all up and pull it apart. The trick, I think, is not to let people know exactly what you made things of. You just kind of want to bunch it together, and they're like, that's a cute beard. How did she get that? So I just took the rope and I pulled it all apart, fold it in the middle to catch all the fibers when I do glue it. But you can see I'll continually fluff the string so that they can't, you don't want them to be able to tell it's rope. It just, I don't know, it's kind of boring to me. So fluff it up in a ball, tangle it all up, and then just make sure you get one part where all the threads will hit the glue, and then just keep messing with it and fluffing it and tangling the beard together. Oh, I just think he turned out so cute. I really love the watermark stains on these little guys, how they came out. Now, a trick could be to dry them quickly with a hairdryer or something like that. That gives you better water stains, sunshine, that type of thing gives you the nice, you know, wet looking stains. So the next thing I did was I decided he needed a little flag on a stick instead of just the flag cloth. So I went out in the yard and I picked a couple of sticks out that I thought were appropriate, not too dead and not too green, just the right color. And I just clipped them off, brought them in, and wrapped the end of the flag around the stick. I like the sticks better than purchasing a wooden rod. I just think it looks more prim. Do whatever you like. That's just my personal preference. I like to use the sticks. I just think it's something they would have gathered back in the 1800s, would be a stick instead of a, you know, manufactured wooden rod. So I did that. I just glued each little flag onto their stick, and I had to figure out how I was going to attach them to the Uncle Sam. At first I thought I would just put a piece of tacked glue on there. I didn't like that idea at all. I kept thinking back to festivals of the past and even just shipping from Etsy and things like that, how it would maybe not be so strong for shipping. Maybe it wouldn't make it to the customer in time. So I decided that I would take some kind of a rope and wrap it around the doll to help hold on, or to tie on the flag onto the doll. But I think I did end up tacking them with a dotted glue as well. The first jute rope that I got out, or sisal rope, I got and I put it on the doll. What I did was I wrapped it around, I think 3 times around the body of the doll to make a cute stringy effect for him. But you know, once I put it on there, sometimes you just have to kind of get a feel for what you want them to look like, and you have to trial and error. And once I got the string on the doll, then I can tell. Once I put it on, I could tell if I like it or not and what I want to change. I was positive I wanted to keep the flags the way they were at that angle, but I had to figure out a way to help adhere the flags. So I went ahead and tried this jute rope or sisal rope here, and I just thought, I don't know, you get the feel for it. I just didn't think it looked right. It didn't have the right feel. The rope just seemed a little bit too thick, and it just wasn't the look I was going for. Sometimes that happens. So you know it's something not right. You can't put your finger on it. So I didn't actually tie it down. I pulled it back off and ended up getting smaller rope. I thought about using some black string, and you know, I just wasn't sure yet. So just don't adhere anything permanently until you just keep trying. Don't give up and just put it on when it doesn't feel right. You know, keep messing with it until you love it. If my dolls don't get a little bit of a giggle when I'm done, then I'm not satisfied. I have to, the one giggle doll, every doll has to have at least a giggle before I'm satisfied and put it out for sale. So you can see it here, I ended up permanently switching to the smaller jute string, which I thought looked a lot cuter. It just looked more appropriate, it felt right for the doll. So without getting too weird, I just thought it looked cuter. So I wrapped it around the doll about 3 or 4 times and then just tied a little knot to help adhere the flag to the doll. So I decided that the Uncle Sam always has to have a top hat, right? And in primitive folk art, it seems like the doll head should be bigger than the hat. The hat should be barely placed on the head. So I measured 2 pieces of muslin and made a rectangle shape, and I ended up sewing the edges to make it, you know, a little hat, a stovepipe hat. So I left the bottom open and I sewed up the sides and up the top of the top hat, or the stovepipe cone. Just sewed them together, and then I turned them inside out and I stuffed the stovepipe hat. This is a Sears sewing machine. I got it many moons ago, about 30 years ago at least, maybe 33-ish, from Sears, and it's just been going so strong all these years. I never have any trouble. I keep the little engine parts, I open it up and I put baby oil on them in case, you know, it drips down into my fabric or something. I don't want anything to get it ruined, but this little sewing machine has done wonders, and they don't make them anymore. It's from Sears. I think it's a Kenmore brand, but it just goes and goes and goes. I love it. Very simple, very basic. They don't make them like they used to, that's for sure. So there's my stovepipe hat I finished. I did end up folding the rough edge under because you don't want to see all that, and it was just a perfectly little round circle, but I thought it needed a little base, a little stem, so, or what do I want to say, a little base to set it on, and so I know there's a word for that, but I can't think of it. I just got a tablet of cardstock, which really surprised me I did this, because usually I find something out of the trash, a piece of cardboard, and reuse that, but for some reason this time maybe there wasn't any. I think I just cleaned and the garbage can was empty, but I just used a piece of cardstock out of a tablet I have for scrapping, and all I did was make a circle, and I had to find the appropriate size of circle. So just take any kind of circle you can find. What I use whatever's in front of me. This is a cap off of a paint, one of my paints, so it was the perfect size. It's smaller than the head, which again, the little folk art dolls always have the cap brim, that's the word I was looking for, the cap brim smaller than the head. They always kind of look comical. So I just traced this little circle around to give me a guide, and remember I had to make 2 of them. So I traced the circle around and cut it out. I decided to cover the brim with some black ticking. Sometimes I use blue, but I just liked black in this case because the pants, his little breeches were already blue. So I decided to use the black ticking, and I just made circles of the glue around and around until I got really close to the edge. And the reason I did that because I wasn't sure how I was going to finish the edges yet. I just knew I wanted that fabric on it. And I thought about, you see here I kind of mess with it after I glue the other side. I did the same thing. I just go in circles. It seems like it adheres the glue better. Just go really close to the edge, because if you're going to end up doing the edges, you want them to be nice and neat. You don't have to deal with, you know, all that messing. So I thought about folding the corners up, and I kept thinking it would pucker and it wouldn't look really nice. I debated a little bit. I started to glue the corner down, and I just kept thinking it's not going to look nice and finished. So what I then decided to do is just trim the black ticking up to the cardboard stock, and it worked really good because I got my glue so close to the edges. You can't see the cardstock at all. It doesn't even show because the little bit of fraying that the ticking does covers up the cardstock. It just worked out really well. So that's what I did for both hats. I just hot glued on both sides of the cardstock and trimmed the edges. I made sure the threads came out and covered up the cardstock, and it worked like a charm. Here I just use regular stuffing polyfill from Walmart. I like using other things. I like using sawdust and buckwheat and walnut hulls and things like that to make your doll nice and heavy. But this time they're little sugar sack dolls, and I didn't have a lot of time. I had a lot of dolls to make, so I didn't get into a lot of detail. I thought I would keep the price down. And the crushed walnut shells, all the extra sawdust and the buckwheat hulls, they make your doll nice and heavy, and it feels more primitive. So that's something to keep in mind. But I just stuffed the hat with stuffing, painted this cone, painted the stovepipe on the hat, and added a little bit of tangle line. And they're so cute. They get at least 2 giggles from me. I love them. They are my primitive doll. So if I've earned your subscription and you like making crafts, primitive crafts with me, please hit like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next Tuesday on the Cranberry Cornstalk YouTube channel.